to get a bunch of Super 8 films, he would go to the American Embassy and he would get all this candy that you couldn't get in Italy, you know, like Fizzies and Pop-Tarts, Three Musketeers bars and stuff like that. And he would invite all the neighborhood kids to watch these movies for free. But he charged them an arm and a leg for the candy.
Cue the music.
While it isn't necessary, I do recommend watching parts 1 and 2 because everything we've talked about so far is about to pay off. The creation of the PG-13 not only solved the growing parental concern over content, the pairing of its creation with two effects-driven blockbusters would lock it in as the sweet spot for profit-minded filmmakers from that point on. As Steven Spielberg, the man who created the problem and supplied the solution, put it, in a way, it's better to get a PG-13 than a PG for certain movies. Sometimes PG, unless it's for an animated movie, it turns a lot of young people off. They think it's going to be too below their radar and they want to say, well, PG-13 might have a little bit of hot sauce on it. Joe Dante agreed, stating, an older child will not watch anything a younger child will watch, but a younger child will watch anything that an older child will watch. Candidates for the first recipient of the rating were already lined up in July, with The Razor's Edge, Johnny Dangerously, The Flamingo Kid, Red Dawn, Dreamscape, and The Woman in Red either quickly submitted or already in the process. According to their own timeline, the first film to receive the rating was The Flamingo Kid. The first film to retroactively receive the rating was the Alfred Hitchcock creature feature The Birds, a film which Joe Dante mentioned was an inspiration for Gremlins, the very film which had led to the rating. But the first film released with a PG-13 would be Red Dawn on August 10th, 1984. Red Dawn shares the same thematic tie to nuclear paranoia as Gremlins, only this time combining it with the contemporary Cold War tensions with Russia. And also like Gremlins, it's the children who must protect themselves and their community.
I can't afford to be crying anymore now.
The conventional war, the limited nuclear exchange, has been something we've been hearing about a lot in the news, you know. It's a very alarming prospect, a limited nuclear exchange, because it will lead to the type of war described in the movie.
And director John Milius, another friend of Steven Spielberg, couldn't help but start the rating off with a literal bang. He had written Quint's haunting USS Indianapolis speech in Steven Spielberg's Jaws, an act which correlated a real event during World War II with the horrors the characters and the audience were experiencing. A few years later, he penned the script for Francis Ford Coppola's anti-war Vietnam epic Apocalypse Now, shortly followed by finding his own directorial success with the violent fantasy film Conan the Barbarian. With Milius behind the wheel, a packed cast full of fresh young faces, and the newfound freedom of a rating that hadn't quite been defined, the timing seemed perfect. When the film released on August 10th, it was an immediate success.
The new rating didn't keep parents from bringing young kids. A lot of people getting shot up there. Didn't scare you?
No.
Why not?
I don't know.
You think that happens all the time? People walk out of schools and get shot?
Not that often.
Going on to gross the modern equivalent of $117 million. However, as we should be very familiar with by now, the film and its release wouldn't be without controversy.
Soviet officials have gone on the offensive against what they see as an American 35mm weapon.
In America, it caused a political storm. They are promoting international hatred.
The U.S. National Coalition on TV and Movie Violence, the transatlantic chapter of the Mary Whitehouse Brigade, has declared Red Dawn to be the most violent film ever.
When you start out your new rating with the film featuring the most violent acts, what sort of future do you expect it to have? Just 5 days after Red Dawn, Dreamscape, directed by Joseph Rubin, would release. It was like the bastard cousin of Temple of Doom and Gremlins, with a story focused on conquering childhood fears, mixed with creature horror and a side of Kate Capshaw. Unlike with the now defunct M rating and the future NC-17, these films, and the ones that followed, proved the rating wasn't a fluke, and it could be successfully applied to films of any genre. The line separating a PG-13 from an R or a PG in those first few months are thin and fascinating. Of the 25 films to receive a PG-13 in the fall of 1984, half were science fiction, fantasy, or horror, the other half comedy or drama, and 1/3 were edited prior to release, with the most common item removed being nudity, a topic which will take up an episode of its own. The sole F-bomb rule, which had come about in the mid-70s for PG films, was carried over to the new rating.
You miss, fuckface!
But as discussed in previous episodes, it would take several years for this guideline to sink in. In fact, in the very beginning, there seemed to be only one thing the MPAA definitively thought was PG-13, ripping someone's heart out. In just that first group, you've got Dreamscape, David Lynch's Dune, and the Meryl Streep, Robert De Niro romantic drama Falling in Love.
Go on, say, what is it?
I was just thinking that maybe this isn't such a great idea.
I wanted to spotlight Ghoulies not only because of its similarities to the films that we've been discussing, but was also a successful proof of concept for PG-13 horror. And the tale of its inception, troubled production history, massive success, and 40-year battle for ownership make it more fascinating than I could have ever imagined. Additionally, because Charles Band also produced the first-run PG-13 film, The Dungeon Master, this video features a perspective from 8% of the entire first run of PG-13 films in 1984. Let's introduce our two players. A few years apart, both had grown up in Italy, the sons of prominent filmmakers. Both established a love for the silver screen through the films of Ray Harryhausen.
To this day, I remember that.
Mind-blowing for me, not because it was a scary movie, just because of the fantasy element and the stop-motion animation. And anything with stop-motion animation was movie crack. There were several other movies, I forget the names, of the 50s that I saw that had to do with, Lilliputian or small characters coming to life. I mean, there was a little bit of that. That was also always really fascinating.
Writer-director Luca Bercovici was a third-generation screenwriter who got his start working as a dialect coach for the 1980 adaptation of Shogun alongside his father Eric, who wrote and produced. Within a year, he was working on scripts, acting in bit parts on television, and performing in his band Fela and the Johnsons with writing partner Jeffrey Levy. In 1982, Bercovici would score his first lead opposite cinematic newcomer Demi Moore in the motion picture Parasite 3D. The film was directed by Charles Band, a man who had modeled his career after the novelty of William Castle, cheapness of Roger Corman, and exploitative showmanship of P.T. Barnum. His father, Albert, was a noted producer of Italian spaghetti westerns and horror films, and after spending most of his childhood on the sets with his brother, Charles began producing and directing his own films in the mid-70s. After several minor successes like Laser Blast and Tourist Trap, he had begun to make a name for himself, but had yet to truly prosper.
I learned early on that the sci-fi canvas for a low-budget filmmaker was just too expensive. Much better to have more of a character-driven movie, horror movie, monsters, creatures, puppets, dolls, more manageable. So I sort of veered off into that direction. If the money was better, and it changes from year to year anyway, I would have done more sci-fi because I love sci-fi. So I don't know, somehow I got inspired to do a creature type movie. And I thought Parasite was a good idea I cobbled together. And I was getting very close to Stan Winston, who he was the effects guy in my first movie, did an amazing job. This is back before any CGI tricks. You look at Lance Hendrickson in the basement without his eyes, you go, how the heck did they do that? Let's make a fun creature feature monster movie where things can come at you in 3D. And it came together really, really quickly. It got a reasonable theatrical release, which was nice, even though, like all those deals, unless you're handling the distribution yourself, You rarely make any overages. I got some advance, that was the end of that. But what was also cool is it led the way to Metal Storm a few years later, because the fellow who ran AFCO Embassy at the time, a guy named Bob Ramey, a few years later became the president of Universal. And that was during the Jaws 3D, production. And we stayed kind of close. And when I thought, okay, it's time to make a Mad Max kind of 3D movie, and I invented this idea to do Metal Storm, it meant something. They said, hey, you got a call from Robert Ramey, the president of Universal. He said, Charlie, I hear you're shooting a movie called Metal Storm, and very expensive to equip the screens with the lenses and this, that, and the other. And if your movie's any good, I'd like to make you an offer so we could come in right after, take advantage of the whole 3D setup and screen and play your movie. So he said, you got to cut together a reel for me. Give me 10 minutes. Let me look at it. Obviously, it was a big opportunity. So I had the editor work over the weekend, cobble together some of the material we had shot, messengered it on Monday to Universal, and he made an insane offer. It played right after Jaws 3D. So if you were going to movies at the time, you would see Jaws 3D, and you would see these great commercials for Metal Storm. I thought, oh shit. And it did well. It did well for Universal. But the real financial success that helped propel Empire through the 80s was Ghoulies, which we distributed ourselves and actually reaped the benefit of, the profit we made.
Yeah, I had, developed a relationship with Charlie on Parasite. We both went to the same school, and we both had sort of the same sort of childhood experience in Rome in the 60s. And so there was sort of a kinship that blossomed there. And Jeffrey and I, we were partners. We were working together. We were developing stuff. And we wanted to come up with a one location picture. I love the Dawn of the Dead, and I love, the really true kind of gruesome horror movies. When I pitched it to Charlie, and he bought it. This just kind of dropped in his lap, and it was like exactly what he was looking for. And that was not without incident. I had originally hired my wife to play one of the parts, and he made me fire her. That was bad.
Stan Winston was originally going to help me with it, but that was past Parasite and past when he really could afford the time. And he introduced me to one of his proteges, John Buechler, who he and I stuck close together for many, many years until his untimely death. I had the fantastic Mac Ahlberg, who was the director of photography of Parasite and Metal Storm, and made many of the movies that I'm really proud of that we made in the 80s and 90s.
Ghoulies, even on the page, was supposed to be much darker and scarier. And some of those elements are still in the movie. You're talking about infanticide, you're talking about patricide, you're talking about satanic rituals, you're talking about really dark, dark stuff. We were really, earnest, and we were going to make a horror movie. Until 2 weeks out from production, we see Buechler's creations, and they're just like, they're funny, they're goofy, they're not scary in the least, they're just funny. In the script, they're really just kind of, they're just in the background. They're not really part of the story. They're just part of the sort of the flavor, and they became brought much more to the fore. What are the crazy fucking things that we could get these things to do? You can have them like vomit vegetable soup and play the piano and the toilet thing. Oh, we came up with tons of gags, ghoulie gags. I mean, that's what these things called for. He saw it in a completely different way, and to him, these were frightening little creatures. Time and money was something that John never had, ever, not on anything. I think John he had a really serious career doing what he did, and carved out a niche for himself and kind of a signature, a brand for himself. To see John with his creatures, he inhabited his creatures. His creatures really were an extension of him. I can tell you for a fact that he never really had the time or money to really develop his creatures to a point that they were anything other than what they were. The whole timbre and tenor of the show changed like this, where it was like, okay. And that's probably what accounts for sort of the unevenness in Ghoulies, is that we changed horses midstream, literally.
In the movie, the characters, when we chose based on the storytelling, would put their glasses on. That would be a cue for the audience to put the audience's 3D glasses on, and then those scenes would be in 3D. So it was a kind of a cool idea. The script was written that way. We had already had the experience of making 2 3D movies. So we started, but as we started and I was in contact with the possible sub-distributors, because we were thinking about releasing this movie in New York, the feedback came that A, they were kind of burned out about 3D and the cost to equip the theaters, and B, the logistics, which wasn't quite figured out at the time, of how do they screen this movie flat and then on cue flip over to 3D. It was technically possible, but not easy. And then you would rely, of course, on projectionists. That was not going to work, that would be really unwieldy. So I abandoned the 3D idea. If you watch Ghoulies, you'll wonder, oh, how come they're all sitting at the dining room table? They got sunglasses on. You know, it's like, why?
Charlie's idea was it wasn't going to just be 3D, it was going to be smell-o-vision too. Once he said that, we went in and put the sort of the smell-o-vision, you know, we smell burnt wax, we smell whatever. And then all of that just went by the wayside. We were Writers Guild at the time. We were already shooting the movie and we still hadn't been paid for the script. And so we went to our attorney and we said, what do we do about this? Our attorney wrote a letter to Charlie saying that, you know, Jeffrey Levy and Luca Bercovici rescind their offer to sell you the script. And we had a cashier's check that day. We're down at Corman Stage in Venice, and we're you know, the ritual scenes and stuff, and it's lunchtime, and I come out and somebody says to me, hey, do you know your crew's walking? And I said, what? And I run over and Peter Manoogian's like standing, you know, it's like, you know, scene from On the Waterfront, and he's standing there going, the check is in the mail. And they're just going, fuck you, fuck this. And they said, sorry, Luca, I'm sorry, we have to go. Crew walked, we shut down. And you know, I think we were down for like a couple of months. And my agent at the time, Russ Lister, may he rest in peace, put together a deal with Vestron. Hemdale came in with the money, to the completion money. We finished the film. We were in production at the same time as Gremlins, and we had heard about them and they had heard about us. And in fact, Warner Brothers sued us over the name. We got back on our feet, we finished the movie, and Charlie decided that he was going to delay release until October. There was sort of a Halloween kind of vibe to the movie. Gremlins came out before us, but we were in the can at the same time. Joe Dante just did it far better than we were ever capable of doing.
I feel remiss in criticizing anybody's ripoffs when my first picture was Piranha, which was a ripoff of Jaws, and you know, so.
But back in 1984, due to the multiple production issues, the short film compilation The Dungeon Master would be released by Empire in the fall instead of Ghoulies. But by December, the company began preparing for the film to release early the following year.
I felt it was a movie that could release ourselves theatrically. This was a huge turning point, because up to then, all the movies I made went through other distributors. I just knew that we were never going to be able to be prolific and do what I wanted to do without controlling the cash coming in from distribution. Pretty good idea of what it would cost, and Ghoulies seemed to be the right movie, kind of at the right time. The title sounded great. This business for me has always been hand to mouth. You know, good stretches, bad stretches. You have a little money, you have a good idea, you hope, put the money where your mouth is. So I was right on the precipice with Ghoulies of, do I give it to a distributor and get some money, and probably the last money I'd ever seen, or do I finally step out and do the distribution myself? I decided on the latter. You know, when we evolved into doing distribution in the 80s, you know, we released some movies, Empire did, with 1,000 prints, like Troll. 1,000 prints, you know, $1,200, $1,300 a print back in the day, and then twice that amount for print, for media, advertising. It was a huge amount of money. You had to support, in our case, 3 regional offices, a lot of heavy lifting, shipping prints back and forth. You know, it was a whole mechanism that really doesn't exist anymore today. The idea with Ghoulies was to release it in Manhattan, in New York, take a shot, because if you succeed there, the whole country's looking. You can take 100, 200 prints and roll them across the country. If you fail, then you're dead. There's no recovery. So a lot of people back in the day would release a movie in a small market with 5 or 10 prints, see how it does, and then expand, and eventually wind up going to New York and LA and Chicago. But the advice I was being given, since it was sort of a high concept exploitation movie, was release this big time in New York, take your shot, and if it goes well, you can do great. If not, you fold up your tent, and that's the end of it. And then it was a matter of building a campaign, trying to find a way to be different. And sub-distributor guy who was really the booking agent for New York, he said, if you're going to release this in whatever it was, 4 weeks from now, you need a great trailer, you need a great print campaign, you need to get a rating, because you cannot run any ads in newspapers if it was unrated. They wouldn't let you do that. You can't run an ad in the New York Times if it's an unrated movie. I went to my friend Gary Allen. I said, Gary, you've got to help me out. We need a great trailer, which he's very good at. He'd cut trailers for me before. And we need a great print campaign. So I went over to his house, and he's a super pot smoker. It was not my thing, but he opens the door, there's a billow of smoke. He said, I got a great fucking idea for your movie. Genius. I go, what is it? He goes, picture a ghoulie coming out of the toilet, and the copy line is, they'll eat your ass. And I go, no, that's really terrible. We got to get these ads into the New York Times. It's not going to happen. And anyway, then we spitballed, and he was smoking more weed, and he goes, I got a classier line. He said, you still got to go with the ghoulie coming out of the toilet, but let's let the copy line be, they'll get you in the end. It's like, okay, that's pretty clever. But I said, this toilet bowl thing, I just don't think it's going to happen. But, maybe he was contact high, but he got me excited. The first problem was there was no scene in the movie of a ghoulie coming out of the toilet. So, I had to go with Gary and a photographer, first time in my life, last time in my life, buy a toilet, get John Beekler, bring the ghoulie, none of this is fancy Photoshop. You have to shoot the ghoulie coming out of the toilet and the thing. And I mocked up the campaign, and my guy in New York loved it. He said, you got to get your rating. I had to sort of charm the women at the MPAA who were harder on independent movies. The MPAA is a consortium of, it's the studio really that kind of rates, their movies. And many stories of independent films that shots taken out of their movie to get an R rating that similar shots remained in bigger studio films. Whatever. I went over there and I showed her this is on a Friday, I showed her the poster and she laughed. I put the spin on it. I said, this is a horror comedy. I said, it's a little over the top, but you can tell there's a ghoulie coming out of the toilet. And we were praying for the rating, and she said, well, normally 3 or 4 of us screen this, but so-and-so is sick, so I'll look at it over the weekend. Call me Monday. I'll let you know what your rating is. By pure miracle, she gave the TV spot the rating that you could literally play it on Saturday morning cartoons on TV. It was like no restriction.
Ghoulies. They'll get you in the end. Rated PG-13. Starts Friday at a theater near you.
So I felt like I'd won the lottery. I kind of did. Made the prints. Prints were shipped, spending, for me, a lot of money in the marketing. Ads are running in the New York Times. It opens that Friday, and my guy, I was worried, calls me, he goes, said, you got a big hit on your hand. People are lining up. You fucking did it. You should be very proud. Call me Monday and I'll give you a good idea of what you're going to gross. I can give you a good idea within 10% what you're going to make across the country, because it's a science. So I go, oh my God. So I had like the best weekend ever. I'm thinking about all the hundreds of movies I'm going to make. So I give him a call and he goes, well, he said, there's good news and bad news. The good news is you made about $1 million gross over the weekend. That projects to this, that, and the other. He said, you're going to have a big hit on your hands. The bad news are parents are super pissed off. You got so many complaints because they're watching these TV ads and kids can't go to the bathroom. They're afraid of the toilet. They're afraid a ghoulies going to come out and eat them. It's a lot of protests, but you're faced with a decision. Change the campaign. The ghoulie can peek around a closet. It can pop under a bed. You can water that down, or leave it the way it is and face the wrath, because maybe part of the reason why people are showing up is because of your poster. I'm glad back then I was crazy and decided, okay, fuck it, let's just stay the way it is. Once in a while, one of these B movies just caught fire, whether it was Halloween or the original Friday the 13th. And the movie was very successful. Made enough money for me to really kick Empire off in the early 80s.
According to Charles Band, the film would go on to gross roughly $35 million. And if that's true, that only makes what happened next even worse.
It made absolutely like no impact on my career at all. I had directed a movie. Yay team. He had a very checkered history, in Hollywood, all the way up to and including and after the time that we worked together, both on Parasite and on Ghoulies. I didn't get paid to direct, and Jeffrey didn't get paid to produce, but we owned 25% of the movie. Do $13 million box office, platinum, 100,000 units at the time, $79.95 a piece. It made money, there's no question about it. Hemdale had bought a certain position in it, and then Charlie went and fucked them over too. We every time we chased Charlie, and then he took that money and he went
on a glorified shopping spree, with purchases over the next few years including a historic 140-room Italian castle for filming locations, the former studio of film mogul Dino De Laurentiis, multiple home video companies, and dozens of films.
That's when we sued.
But Luca was really just another person in line. By the end of the decade, Empire had amassed roughly $50 million in debt, and without a Ghoulies-level success to its credit ever again, the company wasn't able to pay off its debts, and soon went bankrupt thereafter.
And then he had to come in for a deposition, and I was there, and even then, at that moment, I'd had no hard feelings for him, per se, right? And it was like, hey, Charlie, and he was just like, yeah, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I had betrayed him, whatever, life is too short. Empire had gone bankrupt already, and they were selling off the library. We made $100,000 settlement, which was not even pennies on the dollar.
And although Charles Band was able to pivot, becoming the puppet master for his new company, Full Moon, as longtime collaborator and Ghoulies editor Ted Nicolau put it, it ruined the rest of his career, man. When Ghoulies came along, something clicked in Charlie's mind. The little creatures equals potential for creating little merchandising creatures. And I think that set the tone for Charlie's movies forever after. In the meantime, Luca would go back to acting, including an encounter with a familiar face.
I love Joe Dante Piranha, and so I get this interview. Actually, I'm supposed to just go and meet him on this movie that he's doing. I go, wow, that's really cool. And I had I never thought for a minute that he would know who I was or anything. And the first thing he said to me, literally, was, because he kind of talks like that, we were going to put Ghoulies posters up on the wall. And then I'm going, fuck. And he knew who I was. He knew everything. And we got along famously. He hired me. I didn't audition or anything. He hired me. I was one of the first people to get hired on the show, and we're filming, big stuff, right? They flew me up to ILM for this special effects cast thing. We're working, and the Friday comes along on the second week, and it's going great. And I work half a day, and I go to my dad's house and call my machine to get my messages, and it's there's a message on there from Mike Fennell's office, his secretary, going, hey, Luca, Mike and Joe want to have a conversation with you tomorrow on Saturday. Please let us know if you're available. I hang up and I turn to my dad and I go, what does the director and a producer want to see an actor for on a Saturday? And my dad said, to fire him. And I called back and I said, I'm coming in right now. And I'm driving over the hill and I'm just going, God, this is so weird. This can't be happening. And I get into Mike and Joe's office, and Joe's going, I'm so sorry, Luke. I'm so sorry. We sent the dailies to Stephen in London, and he wants somebody physically bigger in the role. And there's nothing I can do. I'm so sorry. And all I could do is sort of make jokes and whatever, and just sort of deal with it. They paid off my contract, and that was that.
Despite not getting that role, Luca was able to successfully pivot into acting and producing, with more than 100 credits to his name, and now he's finally coming out the winner. In Charles Band's book, he states that the rights for Ghoulies had reverted to MGM, and that one day he would get the rights back.
They don't, and he won't. The chain of title on Ghoulies is really quite labyrinthine. Remake and sequel rights fell through a lot of different hands, and we've had attorneys look at this. We've been chasing this down for a long time.
As of January this year, due to 30 years of franchise inactivity, Luca Bercovici and his partner Jeffrey Levy now own the domestic rights, and a reboot is set to begin filming.
The fact that we're sitting here talking about these movies, you know, all these years later is mind-blowing, because at the time you have no concept of that. Nobody ever really capitalized to date on what Ghoulies could actually be. We didn't even do it. Joe Dante hit the Gremlins potential right out of the park from the get-go. We really didn't get to do that. I don't think that the sequels did either. Monsters and Ghoulies and things that go bump in the night are, you know, come from a very sort of deep, sort of dark place. They're a natural stand-in for the things that make that we are afraid of in life. They're sort of like we project onto them these fears. So I think that a lot of that happens sort of subconsciously. I also tend to skew towards goofy sort of humor as well. I mean, as witnessed by the next movie, Rockula.
You see these people, they're dead, I'm not.
And then the Granny, which is when we did stuff intentionally. We did it like, you know, really fucking outside shit intentionally, not by accident. Ghoulies very much belonged in the 80s. The world has moved on, audiences have moved on. Yes, there's a nostalgia factor. I think that it's one thing to have nostalgia for something, it's another thing to be stuck in that nostalgia and not move on. I would find a way to pay homage to the original, but bring it into a new world where these Ghoulies, which are really kind of one of the more important components of the entire thing, and have them live up to their promise and introduce an entire new generation of Ghoulies who were fucking badass motherfucking thing. We're not blobs of fucking, you know, rubber, but just we're fucking gnarly and funny and just brutal, and, you know, and there's a lot of blood and chaos. And if I can add to that, have it have a sense of social resonance. Have it belong in today with not just a wink and a nod, but a real sort of hats off to the past, but bring it into present day in all its ugliness.